I'm happy to welcome you all to tonight's virtual event with Brookline Booksmith, celebrating the release of Road of Bones with author Christopher Golden in conversation with Paul Tremblay. My name is Alex Schaffner. I'm the events director for Brookline Booksmith in Brookline, Massachusetts. I see that there are people from all over the place here today. So if you've never heard of us before, welcome. Thank you for making us your independent bookstore tonight. And if you know us well, welcome back. All of you form our community, and it's wonderful to have you here. And we appreciate so much your support of an indie bookstore and of Chris's work through your purchases and your attendance. I'd like to start by thanking Paul Tremblay. Hello, Paul, for being here tonight as moderator. Paul is the author of A Head Full of Ghosts, The Cabin at the End of the World, and Survivor Song, and the upcoming The Pallbearers Club. He's a juror of the Shirley Jackson Awards, which means he has excellent taste and is a perfect person to be here tonight. He's actually appeared as part of our event series many times and in many ways. It's wonderful to have him back. So thank you, Paul, for being here. Now I'm excited to introduce Christopher Golden and his new novel, Road of Bones. Chris is a prolific writer of tremendous rage, and I got so excited by the cover that I said rage. So tremendous rage and talent.
He is definitely full of tremendous rage.
I'm well known for my rage.
We're going to discuss his rage tonight.
Also range, happily enough, who has entertained readers and viewers across the gamut of media and genres. He's written for both adults and teens, for video games, the animated series Ghosts of Albion, and comics, including Baltimore with Hellboy creator Mike Mignola. He's the author of many, many media tie-ins and original novels and has edited numerous anthologies. His work has been nominated for the British Fantasy Award, the Eisner, and multiple Shirley Jackson Awards. For the Bram Stoker Awards, Golden has been nominated 10 times in 8 different categories and has won twice. His original novels have been published in more than 15 languages and in countries around the world. In Road of Bones, a small documentary film team traverses the infamous Siberian Kolmia highway and is met by an empty town, impossible creatures, and a mysterious and terrible figure whose fearsomeness is equaled only by the barren landscape and the bitterest cold on earth. Atmospheric, tantalizing, and infinitely readable, Road of Bones is exactly what you want to settle into and devour in the depths of winter. So it's wonderful to have Chris and Paul here. Welcome to them both.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Alex and Brookline Booksmith. Because I'll just jump right in. We're here to celebrate Chris's awesome Road of Bones. I was going to start off by goofing around with your name. Like I don't think I've ever heard anybody call you Christopher, other than like when we're introducing you, right?
Right.
Like no one said, "Hey, this is Christopher Golden. This is Chris Golden." Who calls you Christopher? Anybody other than the title of your books?
Lansdale. Casey Lansdale calls me Christopher. And I have one friend from college who calls me that. And otherwise, whenever people ask me, I say professionally, I'm Christopher, and personally, I'm Chris.
Okay. No Topher. Any Tophers out there?
No, I'd punch you if you called me Topher.
Okay. So see, he's full of rage. It didn't take much at all.
It didn't take long for me to turn to rage. Exactly. That's correct.
Okay. So Alex mentioned, now I'm going to try to stay away from spoilers and let you like go as near to like story content as you want with some of the questions. I know I blamed you on Twitter for New England Storm. I'm standing by that comment. I really don't think your
might actually have more
your marketing team. Yeah, your marketing team really didn't have to go to those lengths to release your Yeti book. There's no Yeti in it. I just wanted to call it a Yeti book. All right, so let's talk about the road.
That's
She
the
mentioned,
next one.
So the Road of Bones, I mean, the title of the novel references, the Russian highway that Alex mentioned in the, in the introduction. So I don't know how, what I have written down here first is let's talk about the road itself. Like, how did you stumble across it? Was this something that you've had like laying in the weeds for a while? I'm like, oh, now I'm going to do the story. Or was this something when you had finished your most recent novel? Geez, was it Pandora's Room? Red Hands. And then were you looking for a new idea? I don't know. So maybe talk a little bit about the road itself.
Yeah, I mean, what happened. First of all, thank you, Paul, for doing this. I really appreciate it. And I want to also talk about your work, if we can, and talk about the Pallbearers Club, which I am a little dismayed that I feel like I'm the only writer who doesn't already have an arc. But okay, I see how things are. And also to thank Brookline Booksmith and Alex. So I had finished Red Hands, which was my most recent book, and what I usually do in a case like that is I talk to my editor, and I have sort of 2 or 3 ideas about something I might want to do next. And I sort of sent him an email with a few of those things. And then immediately I followed on from that with, but I'm also toying with this other idea for this thing that I just ran across the other day, and it's about this. And it was literally like a paragraph. And he responded that same day with, we want that. And that was Road of Bones. And I think it was because for me, so let me back up. So I don't know how I stumbled upon the article that led me down the rabbit hole of investigating Road of Bones, but I stumbled upon an article that explained what it is. And the Road of Bones is also called the Colima Highway, at least for most of it. It's a 1,200-mile road that travels southeast to northwest through Siberia in some of the most inhospitable landscape on Earth. And it travels through a region of the planet where people really should not live. That in the summertime, it's okay, but in the wintertime, it is very common, at least in the central sections of this area, that the temperature gets down, not even including the wind chill, to 30, 40 below 0 Fahrenheit. With the wind chill, there are places where it has gotten as low as 80 or 90 degrees below 0. If you are on the Road of Bones in the wintertime and you run out of gas, or you have a car accident, or or your car breaks down and no one comes along pretty quickly, you will die. So on the one hand, you have that element of immediately, I was reading that, I was thinking, holy crap, like people live here, which in and of itself is terrifying. But then once you start reading the history of how and why the road was made. So to summarize that, it's just that they needed to move goods, that they were finding gold and other goods, uranium, that they were finding in the north of Siberia. And the river froze in the wintertime, and they needed a road. And so to build this 1,200-mile road, they built gulags. They built about 80 prisons in this region. And they put the people who were prisoners at the gulags to work year-round on this road. And they estimate at this point, and they would put you in prison at a certain point for anything. Mm-hmm. You looked at somebody's wife wrong, they'd put you in the gulag because they needed workers. And the reason they needed so many workers is because everyone died. So the estimate is anywhere between 200,000 to 1 million people died building this road, this 1,200-mile road. And when they died, they were literally plowed under the permafrost, and the work carried on, which chills me even to say. And so in addition to the inhospitability and the isolation of the idea that you're living at the fringes of human civilization, like at the edge of everything, you also are living in this place that, I don't believe in ghosts, Paul, but if anywhere is haunted, this place must be. But at the same time, my immediate thought was, my first thought was, I have to write a book set here, a horror novel set here. But my second thought was, when I was younger, and probably 99% of horror writers would write a book about the dead beneath the Road of Bones rising from their unmarked graves, right, to wreak vengeance. And I didn't want to write that book. And I wanted to write my book soon, before somebody wrote that book. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to write a book that was about other things. So we can, which we can talk about. But that's sort of the history of what happened. I was just happy that my editor immediately was like, yeah, we want that.
Right. Okay. So I'll come back to winter horror stuff, but let's go there since you said, other things. I mean, this isn't a spoiler, say there are supernatural occurrences within the novel. Right. Again, so I'll let you decide like how much you want to give away or not. But I was curious, given the setting, like how much of this was actual Russian folklore from maybe central Siberia, or how much of this was invention. I don't know. So it's not really a question. It's just
so the two main characters, these guys, Felix Tieglin and Jack Prentice, they're documentary television producers, basically, and they're trying to create material to use to sell a TV show called Life and Death on the Road of Bones, which I'm surprised nobody has done. And basically they're up there and they encounter things that are supernatural, but in answer to your question, some of which is folklore based. Mm-hmm. The thing that fascinated me about this region when it comes to folklore is that a major percentage of the people in the region are still animists. They have, their religion is animism or shamanism. They believe in spirits that inhabit the wilderness and animals and things like that. And not in a, people hear that and they think it's like ancient paganism, and it's really not. It's it's a modern current religion. Another major percentage of the people who live there are Christian. And there's a lot of overlap. A lot of people practice both. I found that really fascinating. But I also looked at the idea of, okay, well, those two things sort of exist side by side comfortably in this region. But there are also older bits of folklore, older bits of legend and mythology that go back even further. And then there's sort of my invented sort of pre-human, pre-anything mythology that's sort of layered underneath that in this book. Mm-hmm. So, I really sort of picked and chose the elements from the Siberian folklore or the folklore of the Yakutian people who are the people who live in this region, and essentially brought the ancient evil of my invention up into that. It's hard without giving spoilers.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good way.
But basically, I collided those things. So there are sort of 4 layers of belief in the book that I was able to play with, and I just loved it.
No, I feel like that came through because I thought you did a really nice job with the 2 main characters, Teague and Prentice, in their sort of interaction with a culture that's not one that they're used to, and I thought you did that with respect and finesse, while also having it be an exciting story too. So I want to ask you more about Teague and Prentice. Because I think this is for people who are like friends of writers or like family members of writers, like as a writer myself, like it cracks me up when my family reads a book because they're like, oh, that was me, this was them. And like, in my head, I'm like, no, that, but I understand it because, I've been very fortunate to have a lot of writer friends that I admire, you included. And so I have to tell you, when I was reading the book, I had a hard time not imagining Prentice as either Jim Moore or maybe Tim Levin. And you as Teague. So I don't know. Like,
are you suggesting I owe those guys money? Because I don't. I promise.
Well, I don't know. It's like, oh yeah, they work together. This is the project that we're working on together. So I just wanted, that was just a sort of a fun way to get you to talk about their friendship, which to me felt really warm, authentic, but also like real in a way that there's tension. But also I think that the same kind of tensions that really sort of make a friendship at the same time. Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. So maybe talk a little bit more about their friendship a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And I do know what you mean. In the sort of history of my career, I've written a lot of female points of view, female main characters. I've purposely filled my books with a lot of representation of people who aren't like me. Mm-hmm. But when it came to write Road of Bones, what felt right for me was these 2 guys. And I realized I'd kind of never done that before. And also, it's not what we tend to see in horror stories, whether they're on screen or in a book, because it's these 2 guys. It's their sort of bromantic friendship. And it's a sort of real adult, as you said, it's this adult friendship of guys who know each other maybe a little too well. They love each other, but they give each other such a hard time. In this case, it's like Teague is this guy who's a dreamer. He's constantly got a plan, but he's alienated so many of his friends because they believe in him, but he costs them money as he borrows money and the investments don't pan out. And Prentice is going along with him both because Teague owes him money and he's hoping that this will be the opportunity to recoup that money, but also because he knows Teague's his best friend, and he's got nobody else who's willing to back him, nobody else who's willing to have faith in him anymore, you know. And so I really like that idea, because you just don't see it that much. And I'm a person, and I know I've talked to a lot of other writers, friends of ours, who sort of feel the same way. You know, growing up, I got along a lot better with my female friends than I did with my male friends. I think because I just didn't fit into, I didn't like the things most of those guys liked. And, you know, I had guy friends, but it was not the same. And it was only when I got older and I started to meet a lot of the geeks that were like me, who loved the things I loved and were passionate about it and spent a lot of time in their heads and imaginations. So that kind of was, it felt familiar and it felt good, and to have these guys relying on each other, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Follow up on the character. You sort of talked about it a little bit, but I'm curious, because I mean, I'm nowhere near the amount of books that you've written, but you know, as I'm writing more and more, like, you know, thinking about like the different characters that we end up sort of creating, you know, with, you know, so with ever how many books you've written now, and the more that you continue to write, do you find that, like, do you even think of the characters in terms of little pieces of you? Do you find that weirdly the characters are more like you now, less? Like, was that ever a thing that you considered? When I say the characters, I'm really talking about, I guess, the main characters of the longer works.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that I used to always say that, you know, years ago, I did a 10-book young adult mystery series called Body of Evidence. The main character was this 18 and 19-year-old girl named Jenna Blake. And I used to always say, not joking, that of all the characters I'd created, Jenna was the one who was most like me. And that was because of her personality, her sort of, you know, there's a roadblock, we will find a workaround. And so I do think that there's part of me in all of the main characters that I've created. Certainly Teague is one of those guys who I don't usually, you know, a lot of writers do writers as their main characters, and I tend to avoid that if I can, because it feels so cliche. But when trying to figure out who's on purpose going to the Road of Bones in the middle of winter, who would be unfamiliar with it, because again, I think it's important writing this story that I had to write it from the perspective of an outsider, because I am an outsider. That it seemed like somebody who was going to do a documentary would be an appropriate character. But it is this idea that Teague is this character who is going to be, I have this idea, I have that idea, I have, you know, and there are some things that are ideas of Teague's that are mentioned in here that are things I once pitched that, you know, that went nowhere, because like, I think is a brilliant idea, but other people just go, what is wrong with you? You're just wired wrong. So yeah, there's certainly a lot of that.
All right. I'm just going to say, remind folks that if you want to ask, you know, I'll save time toward the end, you know, probably like 7:35-ish. We'll go to the Q&A, but a reminder, if you have any questions, throw it in the Q&A, not in the chat. Okay, let's talk generally. How about some winter horror talk? This is, I mean, you've probably done more winter horror than I'm aware of even, but it's a fairly recent second foray into winter horror. Obviously, Snowblind, which is sort of what we lived through these last few days, I guess, in a way, and Road of Bones. So what do you think, for you, what's the appeal of winter horror?
Yeah, I would say I would consider my novel Ararat to be winter horror as well, because it's, you know, there's a big blizzard. That's the piece of the book. I feel like the most appealing thing and the most terrifying thing in Road of Bones to me is the isolation. It's the idea that you are not within range of help. And I think for me, it all is rooted back to being a little kid and reading Jack London's To Build a Fire for the first time. And for those who haven't read it, To Build a Fire is a story about a man who's foolishly traveling through the Yukon in the middle of a blizzard on foot, trying to get from one camp to another camp. And he has to stop. He's basically freezes to death, while attempting fruitlessly to build a fire in the middle of this snowstorm, come to find out at the end of the book that he is, or the end of the story, he is literally like 100 yards away from help and another camp. To me, that isolation and loneliness and being out of range of help is at the root of the best winter horror stories, because usually that's the case, right? You're snowed in, or you're unable to get to assistance in any way. And also there's a threat that doesn't exist elsewhere, right? There's the idea that if you don't get help, you will freeze to death, you will die. And I don't know, growing up in New England, we just had this big storm. You got almost 31 inches of snow.
Yeah.
I was a kid during the blizzard of 1978. I was 10 years old during that blizzard. And I remember, just completely, the whole state shut down for a week. I mean, it was just crazy. So I think about that. And I find it unsettling. And there's something really insidious about that cold. So,
yeah. It's funny.
I love those. Also, John Carpenter's The Thing, based on the John W. Campbell story, Who Goes There? That's Carpenter's The Thing is probably the best horror movie ever made.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I was going to say, it's funny. Like, I don't think I've ever had a discussion about winter horror with like someone who lives in like Florida or the south of France or a place where you're not seeing like a New England winter. Because I do think there's that sort of, in a weird way, for us, maybe there's that appeals like, oh, we have it bad here, but it's not that bad. Or I even think there's a little bit of like, for the horror fan, that like, oh, a snow day. I mean, there's still that feeling of safe danger with the snow days. Like, oh, we're home from school because, things are so bad. Oh, things are so quote unquote bad enough that you have to stay home. Right.
Right.
I don't know. There's an appeal to that. I like that, and it comes to play in your book. There is no margin for error for the characters. Mm-hmm. Like, you can make a mistake maybe in your setting, but maybe overcome it. But like you said, like if you end up stuck on that road, it's too cold. Like, you can't just like flee.
Well, that's why, again, the book opens with Teague is behind the wheel of their vehicle, and he snaps awake because he's fallen asleep at the wheel, and he almost wipes them out. Right. And it's that moment, that acknowledgement of, and that was my way to set it up immediately, the danger that they're in before you introduce any supernatural element at all. It's like, you are already in danger of dying just because you were stupid enough to come here. Right.
No, that scene reminded me, I never drove the Road of Bones, but when I was a stupid graduate student at UVM, parents just got divorced. So it was I was on my own financially. I had a credit card of a max of $1,000, and it was essentially maxed out. It was Valentine's Day weekend, a huge snowstorm, but like, I'm driving to see my girlfriend, Lisa, who's my wife. I rented a car, but I didn't have enough room. I didn't have enough money to pay for the insurance on the rental car. So I'm like, screw it. Wow. And so I drove. Like, I've never been so terrified driving on like the snowy road. And there was once the car started to spin. Man, I was right there with Teague. It would have been financial ruin.
Right. For me, it's I had gone during college. I had gone to UMass Amherst to visit a friend of mine out there. And of course, as you do in college, we'd stayed up all night. I'd gotten about maybe 2 hours of sleep. I'd been drinking the night before. I was sober in the morning, but I was exhausted. And I was driving back to Boston, literally in a blizzard. But I had to get back to go back to school. And I had the window cranked halfway down, snow blowing in, like, to keep me awake, the music up as loud as it would go. It was almost Christmas, so I remember it was it was Wham. It was Last Christmas came on every 5 songs or whatever. And I was sure I was going to die, because I was falling asleep driving. I just had to keep like snapping my head up. And so writing that scene, and I've written variations on that moment in my life several times, because I I just remember thinking, this is so stupid, but where am I going to go? Like, I can't, there's nowhere for me to go.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, it's a very strange thing.
Driving in the winter. All right. I have a research question, like a general one, but first I wanted to give you the opportunity. Was there other research that you ended up doing? You know, so we talked about obviously the Road of Bones and some folklore. Was there any sort of like hidden or surprise research? Did you have to like dive into the documentary stuff a little bit, or?
I did a sort of deep dive, sort of YouTube online into, I didn't watch, I know that there's an episode of some Ewan McGregor thing where he rides his motorcycle on the Road of Bones. But I didn't watch that because of course it's during the summertime. But I did watch a lot of videos of people had taken in the winter there. And I did specific research about specific towns and villages along the way. For the most part, I wanted to sort of create my own atmosphere, if that makes sense. But what I did do is I wanted to read into the lives of the people who live there. Because again, as a younger writer, I probably would have made a lot of assumptions about the lives of those people. And they would have been wrong and ignorant assumptions. So what I wanted to do is sort of go in and really look at it. And I found a lot of information. I did my research on the reindeer burgers that the characters eat at this roadside bar, roadside tavern. And you know, a lot of other little bit, those kinds of little bits and pieces to create at least a little bit of verisimilitude. But my favorite thing was while I was bouncing around, and I've tried to find its sense, so I might have dreamt this because I can't find it. I didn't dream it, but I found this article, and embedded in the article was a video that was a music video made by, and I refer to the people making this video in the novel. There's a music video made by 4 or 5 young guys who are reindeer herders. And in the video, they have taken a then current Taylor Swift song. I think it was Shake It Off. And they've changed the lyrics, and in their language, and it's translated in the video, they're singing a song about how difficult it is to be a young single guy in this region, because most of the girls they grew up with are, first of all, they're so familiar because there aren't that many of them. So it's like they're siblings, basically. And half of them move away. The girls leave, but a lot of the guys stay and they become, and people don't move there. You know, I mean, it's not a place that people go, I want to live there.
Right.
So the population continues to shrink. But it was these young, sort of very modern people in this region that is so far from what we imagine, but still just very much a part of the modern world, and just living in a really inhospitable place. And I loved that because it broke any if I had any assumptions, it shattered them. And I loved that. So it was, you know, that was probably my favorite. I wish I could find the video because I'd love to share it, but I did include a reference to a similar group of guys making a similar video in the book.
Nice. So my general question on research, I assume you enjoy doing research. I mean, this most recent run of novels definitely seem very research heavy, that you've been writing. So I was going to ask, has that always been the case? Like a love of research? Was there a particular story or book that sort of sparked an interest in research?
It was not a question of my very first novel of Saints and Shadows probably required a bunch of research, but I started it when I was in college, and I was a double major in English and history, and in the history it was European history, and my advisor was a guy who taught a class on the Byzantine Empire, which I took and loved. So the main character in that novel is the bastard son of the last emperor of Byzantium. And I wrote 7 books featuring that character. So I did a bunch of research to make sure, in fact, in the first novel, there are flashback scenes that are ripped from history. And I loved every second of it. but that didn't mean I loved research. It just meant that I was really interested in that particular topic. And I was lazy after that. I didn't want to do a bunch of research. And then I was writing, a number of years later, I was writing an X-Men novel called Codename Wolverine. And it was a period piece set during the Cold War, mostly behind the Iron Curtain in East Germany. And there were a lot of things about the Berlin Wall. And I literally was writing the book and trying to write the book knowing absolutely nothing about the Berlin Wall, what the whole setup was. I didn't at the time even realize that, and some people probably still don't realize, it never even occurred to me that West Berlin was in East Germany, of course, because Berlin was in East Germany, but the city was separated, and so West Berlin was like Escape from New York. It was a little tiny piece of Western democracy in the middle of the Iron Curtain. So I didn't know anything, and I tried to write the book. I think I'd written about 70 pages of the book, and I was like, what am I doing? I'm an idiot. And it was very early days of internet, so I went to the library and I got every book I could find on the Cold War and East Germany and the Berlin Wall, and I brought them home and I read. It took a week and a half or 2 weeks to just read and educate myself, and I hated every minute of it, but I knew I had to do it. And I learned a bunch of stuff that I really liked. So I think it's like, if I find a topic that fascinates me, I want to do that research. But I also spend a lot of time writing, when I'm writing comics with Mike Mignola, that I do Baltimore and Joe Golem and these other things, or Hellboy comics. I do the same thing I do when I'm writing novels, which is I'm writing and I realize, this is a thing I don't really know anything about. Therefore, I need to go down a rabbit hole somewhere and educate myself. I try not to overdo it, And for instance, when I'm talking to an expert in something, which I'll do if I need to know something, I always preface it by saying, look, Paul, I don't need to know what you know. And I don't need to persuade you that I know what I'm talking about. I just need you to tell me enough about what you know so that everybody else will believe it. Because I think that serves the book.
Right.
Because if you've done too much research, then you're tempted to share it. And that's just like putting the brakes on right there.
Yeah. So, I was going to ask for research advice, but that sort of sounds like a little bit of advice right there.
What about you? I'm going to turn the tables for a second, because when you were writing Survivor Song,
I hate research.
That had to require a bunch of research.
Yeah. That needs to be needs to be something of growth that I need to do, as opposed to avoiding research. Like you said, it becomes unavoidable, then you have to do it. But I just don't feel comfortable doing it. I would assume as an English and a history major, you're writing papers, and for history, you had to do research. I was a math major, so I was never really instructed in the proper ways of doing research. So I always just feel, I don't know. I just feel like I don't know what I'm doing, and I don't like that feeling, so I try to avoid it. But yeah, Survivor Song was probably the most research heavy. But again, luckily, part of it was I tried to focus on what the local response to a pandemic would look like, and not like a CDC big giant thing.
Right.
That was, I felt like, one, I didn't want to tell that story, and I would have been out of my breath doing that, or out of my depth, either one. But luckily, my sister works at Beth Israel in Boston, and so I used her for quite a bit, which was fun. I got to do research with my sister, which was amazing. It was just, without getting too far down that particular novel story, it was a little strange to have a lot of things that happened in the book sort of happen when COVID hit. And it was all because of my sister's experience with an almost Ebola outbreak in the US. There was clearly, in 2014 in Africa, there was a big outbreak, but here in the US, 2014 was when I first heard my sister say, PPE. I'm like, well, what's that? And things, things of that nature. So yeah, for Paul, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, I don't know if you're like me, because research-wise, I find the pleasure I do get from it is twofold. One, when you find the piece that you need, that's what I'm looking for, and I can stick that in here, and it will support my, my thesis, right?
Right.
But also, then you find these shiny nuggets, like these that you find a thing that you weren't expecting to find.
Yeah, the
that is gonna be-
serendipitous.
yeah. You're like, oh, this will be great.
Right. No, that's the only thing that is like a cool moment of unanticipated discovery. Like, oh, like for A Head Full of Ghosts, I remember I was just, trying to find like, I wanted the exorcism in the book to be close to what the Catholic rite of exorcism looked like. So at least enough to refer to it. And, just messing around in the internet, I stumbled over like a discussion in a YouTube video of people claiming that, the current Pope actually performed a sneaky exorcism in daylight. And there's a video of it. I was like, oh, wow, this is amazing. I'm definitely going to have to, put that into the book. So, yeah. So, I mean, so for me, that's like different than like, I'm taking 3 books out of the library and learning everything I can about, 1800s Russia or something, which I just find, I mean, I admire writers and I like reading books that were people, who can do stuff like that. Like, Alma Katsu, I think you're great at incorporating research. Alma's book, The Fervor, is amazing. Some other writers, Jim Shepard, who teaches at Williams, is a writer who I think he uses writing as as an excuse to research, like everything, whether it's a short story or a book. But it's like what he creates is just, oh my God, it's just, so amazing. Yeah. So like for me, I've always from like afar, I'm like, oh, that's not my thing. You guys can do that, and I enjoy reading it, but it just still it intimidates me to no end.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe someday. Maybe someday I'll get my library card. I'm kidding. I have a library card. I love libraries. All right.
You know, we should use the school library,
Yeah.
What, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, well, I was going to hit you with my favorite lightning rounds, some questions.
Yeah,
Then we
please.
can
All
go to
right.
the Q&A.
All right.
All right.
I have
So
something to ask you before we go to the Q&A, but go ahead.
Okay, sure. So in the lightning round, folks, the rules are he has to answer quickly, and I may tell him if he's right or wrong.
I'm bad at that.
What's your favorite winter horror novel? Or a favorite? One that just springs.
They're both novellas. Who Goes There by John W. Campbell and White by Tim Levin, which I think is a masterpiece.
All right, good. Yeah, I think that's a good answer. There's one coming out from a British author later this year, All the White Spaces. That's really, really good.
Ali Wilkes. I've read
Ali
it.
Wilkes, yeah.
Terrific. I recommend it to everybody. Yeah.
So we agree our favorite winter horror movie is The Thing. Like, so it's not any point in saying another. So what's a second favorite winter horror film?
Second to that is The Thing from Another World, directed by Howard Hawks, which is the first adaptation of Who Goes There. Very different movie, but still terrific.
Yeah, James Arness. Yeah. You have to pick a third now.
Third. I did like the film version of 30 Days of Night. The TV version, miniseries version of The Terror, Dan Simmons' The Terror, is great.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. I don't think I have
The Shining.
The Shining, yeah. The Last Winter, Larry Fessenden, is pretty disturbing.
I have not seen that.
Yeah, that's a good one. What was I going to say? Oh, it's not a movie, but like one of the best X-Files episodes is Ice. It's very much like a Thingian sort of episode. You remember they're both
yes.
They're both in some like Arctic station, and it's like it's like the thing.
Yeah, it's an absolute like a worm. Yeah. It's a riff on that for sure.
It's still fun though. Okay. No explanation here. Are you a sledder or are you an ice fort builder?
Both.
You got to choose one.
Why?
This is the
when I was a
round.
kid,
you got to choose one.
When I was a kid, we did both. When my kids were little, we did both. If I have to choose between the two, I'm an ice fort builder.
Wow. Okay. Now I'm sledder. Get that building stuff out of here. I can't build things. What's the furthest north you've traveled?
St. Petersburg, Russia. Wait.
Oh, I didn't realize you've been to Russia.
Helsinki, maybe. I'd have to look.
Okay.
I'd have to look on a map to see which one is further north. I'm going to guess it's probably St. Petersburg.
That sounds pretty north to me. Man, I have to go with my other glasses so I can actually read what the hell I wrote on this piece of paper. That's how old I am. Are you a thing or not, Chris?
Am I a thing?
Yeah, or not?
I would say no.
Okay. I don't know if I believe you. Uh, continuing
I
with the
mean,
theme.
we'll just stay here and
Yeah,
drink. And if
that's
we're
right.
both one of these things,
We'll see whose breath shows up.
right, exactly.
So you are trapped on the tundra, could be Arctic, Antarctic. We'll say you're trapped in the Russian tundra with a group of your friends. Who of that group is definitely a thing?
Rio Ewers.
Yeah, that's so obvious. He fails the blood test right off the bat.
Yeah. But I think Hillary Monahan will save us all.
Okay. I agree with that. All right, the last one of the lightning round. Which book behind you causes the avalanche if you were to take it out?
Wow, that's a good one. It wouldn't cause the avalanche. I'm going to say Don Winslow's The Border would definitely cause a problem.
Okay. All right. So before Q&A, you said you were going to toss something toward at
Yeah,
me?
I just wanted to say, look, I know that, and I really appreciate, being in conversation. And it was more you interviewing me, which I appreciate, but I also wanted to make sure everybody's pre-ordering the Pallbearers Club. So I wanted you to, I know you're going to do an event, I'm sure in person, that I'm going to attend in July when the book comes out at Brookline Booksmith, but maybe just tell us a little bit about what the book is.
Sure. So this book is presented as almost like a found memoir of a character who calls himself Art Barbara. That's not his real name. He says like the first line, "I am not Art Barbara," but that's what he refers himself. And his memoir starts in the late 80s when he's a senior in high school. He's a self-identifying loser, with very little friends, very little social life. And he, it's different in the late 80s getting into college than it is now. But even then, like, you sort of like realized, oh, like I have to have some sort of extracurricular activity. So he starts what's called the Pallbearers Club, where, he and anybody else who'd want to join him would volunteer at a local funeral home to serve elderly or homeless that don't have any living relatives. So because, he's not a very popular guy with a lot of friends, only 2 other classmates initially join. But through this club, a strange older woman, I mean, she may only be a year or 2 older, he's not sure, sort of joins the club. And she becomes like this mysterious friend/frenemy that sort of looms over the rest of his life, because the book really goes through 4 decades up into present time. And she may or may not be a supernatural figure from New England folklore. I guess we'd leave it at that. I hope the fun part of the book, one of the fun parts of the book, I hope, is, and this is actually definitely a departure from the last couple books, Cabin and Survivor Song, where those had a lot more, I guess, a thriller structure. And this is, I hope it's funny. Like, I hope the funny parts are funny, and I hope the creepy parts are creepy. And I hope there's some sad parts too. But for me, part of the fun was this friend of his, who I'm not going to name, at the end of every chapter, she writes almost like a rebuttal or a response to the chapter. And then she even takes to, like, if people can see that, she takes to writing like notes in the margins.
In the margins, there you go.
Within the manuscript. And the last thing I would say is the publisher, which is very cool of them, for the first edition hardcovers are actually going to print it in black and red ink. Like, so her marks will be in red ink. So hopefully, that'll be fun. Hopefully the book's good too. But
I'm sure it is, but I wouldn't know because I haven't received an art.
Well, I can.
No, I've already ordered it, so it's all good.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah. Chuck Wendig bullied me into sending him one, just so you know.
I'm excited. I'm excited about it for many reasons, but I'm also envious, and I know we have to get to the questions, because, like, my latest book, which I just finished literally days ago and just turned in, so I'm not going to talk about it now, except to say that it literally takes, it's a 100,000 word novel that takes 8 hours.
Oh, nice.
So that's like the idea of writing a book that takes place over 40 years. People do those things, and it just never occurs to me. It's just not the way I'm wired to sit down and plan out like one of these long generational sagas or anything like that. It's just, I don't know. My ideas tend to be very compartmentalized, I guess.
That was a big challenge for me for this book, especially after doing Survivor Song, which was over like 6 hours, and Cabin, which was over a day.
Right.
I thought at first it'd be easy, and then I was like, oh no. And even then, like, I definitely do some big jumps. but like it was hard trying to find the balance of like how much detail do I go into. I ended up, compared to my other books, like I did a lot of like post editing where I cut 30 pages from what was initially handed into my editor.
Right.
And also because some of it, a lot of the book is really autobiographical. I mean, I definitely lean into it. It's a little bit meta. That art is sort of like a wink and nod me essentially from like an alternate dimension sort of.
Right.
So that was kind of a thing to like, oh, what's actually interesting to the story, or do I only think it's clever because I know this is something that had happened to me? That was sort of like a weird balance thing too. But hopefully it works out. All right, let's
All right,
go
go
through
ahead.
these Q&As.
Before we do, because I don't know if it's in the Q&A or not. Susan Katz had asked if I ever do Zoom, like book club Zooms. Susan, happy to do it. Just reach out to me. My email is very easy. I'm on Facebook, Twitter. My email's at my website. It's all good.
All right. So Randy asks, how long did Road of Bones take to write? Did it come together quickly?
It for a book that's only 77,000 words, it took too long to write. And I'm usually pretty quick, but it did take me about 9 months, which is very unusual for me for a book of that length.
Yeah.
But I do find as I'm getting older, I am definitely slowing down.
So, well, yeah, in all things, right? He said to follow, like, how would this compare for a book that I wrote? It usually takes me like 12 to 15 months.
But you have a real job.
Yeah. It's getting harder to do both, frankly.
Yes.
So everyone please buy the Pallbearers Club. Maybe I can choose one over the other.
Right.
Although it's funny, like I remember there was like fall of 2019 where a kid at my school got up, like we do Monday, like school-wide announcements because it's a small school, and he got up and mentioned the Pallbearers Club, and I was like, what? I was sitting there with my little notebook. I'm like, that's amazing. I could have used that somehow. But then I just sort of thought about that for like months, like what would I do with it, et cetera. And then like the pandemic hit, and initially, even when I had the idea, I was like, oh, this is good. Like, because the two previous novels I wrote were purposeful engagements with the political US, both Cabin and Survivor Song. And, anything you're going to write, politics is going to sneak into it. I think writing is a political act, but also I felt like, oh, this is going to be a fun thing that I'm not writing purposely about Trump, or I'm not writing purposely about anti-vaxxers and stuff like that. So I don't know, for me, it was good timing because I think that was the only way I was going to write a book during the pandemic, was to write that one. Anyway, sorry, that was too long.
No.
So Janine says, Road of Bones intrigues me because of the history of the road, but I don't read horror. I do get scared. Will I be totally wigged out if I read it?
I hope so.
It's a good wigged out.
I'm not going to lie to you, Janine, to sell a book. You should buy it and read it. And if it wigs you out, just read it during the day.
Right. There you go.
But I will say this. Lots of people have told me that it's really scary. I never set out, or almost never set out, to write something scary and think, ooh, I'm going to scare the reader. It's just not the way I work. And what I find really interesting is my wife, who doesn't like horror but reads all my books, she didn't find it that scary, but I have had people tell me it's terrifying. And our friend Judy Pancoast said it was the scariest thing she'd read in 30 years. So I don't know. Judge for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, the scare is so subjective. I mean, sort of like, one of my favorite movies, The Descent, like to me, like some of the scariest parts of The Descent were, I love the monsters, but like the claustrophobia. Similar with Road of Bones, I loved the supernatural elements and in the creatures and stuff. But man, I think I was most like gripped when it was they're going to die because they can't spend another 2 or 3 minutes like outside or the car, et cetera. So it's, I
love The Descent is one of my favorite horror movies for the same reason. It's not just that they are in jeopardy.
Right.
It's that they are in jeopardy in a place where
that's as unforgiving. Yeah.
They're on their own. Yeah.
I think this may be from a relative, from Erin. Do you remember anything that happened during the blizzard of 78 that may have been seeds of horror and helplessness around winter?
So yes, that's my sister, Erin Golden, who's inspired much of my horror and also many of the most admirable characters in my work. So Erin is 8 years older than I am, but my brother Jamie is only 2. And so I remember in 78, the snow was so high in the back of our house that we could climb up the snowbank and climb onto the house and jump off the house into the snow, which we spent hours doing. And I also remember, because the roads were closed and we lived on a hill, we could toboggan like down the middle of the street because nobody was allowed to drive on the road at all. So those are, I have nothing but good memories of the blizzard of 78, even though I know that adults at the time were just not happy.
Yeah, no, my memories are similar. Climbing a snowbank and actually falling through almost over my head, which was scary because it was near like some bushes.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like you said, the roads were closed. My parents dragging us in a sled at least like 2 or 3 miles to my grandparents' house. It's like that must have been like them, like, why did we decide to do this? This was miserable. Well, someone asks, what are your next projects, Chris and Paul?
Again, I don't want to mention, well, I guess I could, what I'll say about my next novel, which hasn't been announced yet, it'll be out around the same time next year. And it is, it's a horror novel set in, it's a suburban horror drama set in, on Halloween night, 1984. And that's what I'm going to talk about at that time. And lots of comics and other stuff I can't mention, but many new comics projects coming from me with Mike Mignola at Dark Horse Comics. Some film and TV stuff that I'm working on. Oh, and I guess I will also say that the next thing that's about to be announced is that Tim Leben and I collaborated on a new horror novella that Dark Horse will be publishing later this year. It's prose with illustrations rather than comics. It's called Festival, and it's set at a British music festival. But yeah, what about you, Paul?
Well, so, Pallbearers Club is July, so it's sort of like all things directed toward that. But I'm working on finishing a short story collection called The Beast You Are. That's due to my publisher in May, so it'd be out 2023. And there's a title novella. I'm laughing because it's sort of absurd. It's going to be like this 35,000 word anthropomorphic animal novella with a giant monster and a slasher. And it's being written in free verse, the freest of all possible verse. So we'll see how that goes. It's actually, I hardly ever describe writing as fun because for me, it's hard. What I'm addicted to is being done and like, oh, I want to share it. But I will say I've actually had fun writing some of this, which I don't know if that's a good sign or a bad sign.
You know what? You never know until it comes out. And here's what I want to say. I want to congratulate you and commend you, because many authors attain a certain amount of success and they don't leverage that success to be able to do whatever the hell they want. And that novella definitely is the kind of thing that you couldn't get away with in mainstream publishing unless you had achieved a certain amount of success. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. Well, I think part of the secret is I haven't told them that's what it is. That it is their fault. I pitched them the Pallbearers Club. I figured it was okay. We'll get like a 2 novel deal, hopefully. And they said, okay, we want another short story collection and another novel. I'm like, you do? I'm like, okay, let's go. Well, I'll write this novella, because in my head I was like, I'd want to do this as a short novel, but there's no way I knew they would ever publish it. It's like, oh, I can sneak in this weird animal thing. Because I mean, this is not Watership Down, but Watership Down is like one of my favorite things ever, both book and movie. So like I wanted to try to do something adjacent to that in some way. So yeah.
Nobody it'll be fantastic. But okay, nobody who's listening to this, tell anyone at Paul's publisher that that's what this is about.
Right. All right. Question for both. What's the scariest book you've ever read? It's always such a hard thing for me to answer. But you go. So you go first.
It used to be a really difficult question for me to answer. And then I read a novel by Ramsey Campbell called The Grin of the Dark. And I don't typically find Ramsey's work that scary. He's brilliant, but I don't usually find him that scary. I don't usually find books scary. But there's something about that novel that got under my skin and really just creeped me out. And I find it really unsettling.
Yeah.
So I advise everyone to read it.
Sarah Grand's Come Closer. It's definitely, talk about, getting under your skin, like the kind of thing, like where if I was reading it late at night, it's like, I have to stop. I'm not going to be able to go to bed otherwise.
Okay.
Because that's when it gets to me afterwards. Usually in the moment, I'm like, oh, that's really cool. That's creepy. And then it's like, uh-oh, I'm trying to, go to sleep now. Laird Barron has done it to me a couple of times with his short fiction, The Broadsword. And most recently, he has a short story in When Things Get Dark, Shirley Jackson anthology that Ellen Datlow did. And his story, oh my God, why am I going to forget that? Why am I going to forget the name of the story? Tiptoe. All right. Whew.
Okay.
Yeah, that's some creepy shit.
Yeah. Which again, and it's hard to scare us. I mean, this is the thing, right? It's like I spend so much time immersed in horror fiction in one medium or another that I don't really find it scary generally. So reading The Grin of the Dark and having that sort of sense of like, I'd like to not be reading this, too late at night on your own, yeah, it's great.
All right, few more, 4 left. I like this one. Paul and Chris, shovel or snowblower?
Snowblower, unless it breaks down. I'm old.
So for years and years and years, it was always shovel for me. I own like a crappy little plug-in snowblower that I rarely use. So for these past couple of years, as someone who's now 50, with heart things that I have to look out for, and also like having had a spinal fusion, I'm giving you my excuses as to why.
Yes, I was the excuses are mounting.
We paid somebody
we
paid somebody to plow our driveway. I still had to spend like an hour and a half doing just the front stairs and stuff like that. So I'll say shovel, but now too old. I gotta go plow.
Well, we used to always shovel, and I did also have one of those plug-in little snow, and those things are crap. They don't work to save your life.
No.
So about, I don't know, 6 years ago, I got a snowblower, and I've never looked back. I was probably about 49 when that happened. So.
All right. Tanya asks, who was your favorite character to write? So I don't know if it was for this book. Let's make it specific to Road of Bones.
Probably my favorite character right in Road of Bones is a character who is only in 2 scenes. She's in it very little.
Yeah.
But she is the grandmother of the tour guide that is leading them along the Road of Bones. And she's an old lady who runs a gas station / convenience store along the Road of Bones, and who smokes way too much and curses at her dog. And, I saw her, I mean, I just like when my character walked into that room and saw her, I saw her. She's the most manifested character for me in the book. And that happens sometimes, that there's a character like, that she almost felt real to me. How about you?
Excellent. Well, I guess with the Pallbearers Club, I was much too mean and hard on Art Barbara. So I enjoyed writing the other characters. We'll call her M. Brown for now. I enjoyed writing her quite a bit, sort of an alter ego in some ways.
So
or a wished upon.
Wait, the character who was sort of you enjoyed writing the character who was abusing that character.
Yeah, So
are you in therapy, Paul?
I think that's what this book is, frankly. No, like in a lot of ways, this book, like, because I hesitate to describe it like this because this is what it means to me. Like, I don't think very many people reading the book would take that from it. But in a lot of ways, this book was about me, now that I'm getting older, figuring out my relationship to writing and how it's wrapped up with anxiety and depression occasionally, and how all three sort of just make this weird ball that became a book. Anyway, all right, we'll ask the harder question first and end with an easy one. So did you find the creative process more difficult during the pandemic? Was it hard to focus and be creative with all the stress happening, or did it help?
It didn't stop me the way that it definitely stopped some people, but it definitely slowed me down. It definitely felt like a distraction. So yeah, I definitely found it more difficult. How about you?
Yeah, for sure. More difficult. And it did, for the first time in my life, feel like, this book in particular was an escape from reality, where I've never ever described reading that way, and I've never described writing that way. But it actually did feel like, oh, okay, I get to go into this book. And in some ways that made it a little bit easier to go sit down. But also at the same time, there were some days I just didn't want to do anything. And the only way to go back to it would be like, oh, I have a deadline. Or even initially when I was pitching the book in like April 2020, May 2020. And it was like, oh, well, my agent who's having a baby in May, like he really wants to get this, done before he has his kids. Like, okay, yeah, other people, I'm a part of a team. It's not just me,
Right.
But aside from my family, obviously, which I care about tremendously, but like my agent doesn't make money if I'm not selling books, and,
Right.
same with the editor and everybody else. So for me, it was like, okay, I've got all these other people that I need that help force me to sit down.
Right.
All right. So I think you're the perfect person for this question to be asked. Will we finally get a return to Nikon this summer?
I have said for the last week to several people that it's my intention to tell Matt Bechtel, the chairman of Nikon, and I've been on the board of Nikon, the committee, for 25 years or something like that, that I don't care if it's Planet of the Apes by then. That as far as I'm concerned, there will be a Nikon this year. And I will also say that we will be requiring proof of vaccination and recent boosters. So barring Ebola
And
there
sleeve
will be
stacks.
a Nikon, regardless of what else happens, even if only 5 people show up. There will be a Nikon this year. It will be in Lowell, Massachusetts, and you will have to show evidence of vaccination and booster.
Awesome. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Nikon, hell or high water. Christopher Golden.
Yeah. Even if I'm the only one there, Paul.
It should really be hell and high water. I mean, I think if it's just one of the two, you're going to have it. If it's just high water,
Right.
I mean, you always have hell. But if it's hell and high water, then that might be tough.
I will bring my swim trunks.
Okay. Maybe we should bring Alex back in. I think we've exhausted the hour, exhausted everybody's patience.
Well, thank you both so much for this wonderful conversation. You managed to get into all kinds of most of the things that I was most excited to hear you talk about this book have been touched on. There are many wonderful twists and secrets still to come. If you haven't read it yet, you can still buy one through the Eventbrite page where you registered through tomorrow morning, in which case it will be signed and personalized by Chris. So run and get those in bulk if you like. So thank you again to Chris and Paul for a wonderful conversation. And thank you to everybody who's here for spending your evening with us.
Thank you. Yeah, everybody buy
Thank you
Chris's
very
book.
much.
It's excellent.
And pre-order the Pallbearers Club.
Yeah, do that.